It's wonderful to be here, and that was a great introduction. So let's just get right into it, because we've been talking all day about the potential of Africa and the potential for a number of investors. And I wanted to start with the two of you and just ask you whether or not we're talking about this in its totality. I mean, has the potential for Africa's economic boom been fully realized, or are we missing something in the discussions that we're having right now? Your Excellency, do you want to start?
Thank you very much. Really so wonderful to be here. First of all, I would like to say a little bit about what AUDA NEPAD is, because people do not know what AUDA is. The African Union created this agency that is responsible to coordinate and execute priority programs for Africa. The most important key thing to do is coordination and mobilization of resources for this. So, that's what we are. You just asked, about, are we really taking advantage of the potential, right? In the eyes of many, Africa is seen as the monolithic gamble by the private sector. I mean, as you know, $273 trillion of capital private is there, out there. But what we are saying is, why don't you invest in Africa? And they say Africa is really a monolithic gamble, which it's not. It is a mosaic of opportunities. And you've heard from speakers to speakers to speakers talking about the potential and, also talking about the willingness of Africa, the determination of Africa, the commitment of Africa to make change. And this is structural, fundamental change. And I think, while we are talking about risks and all this, this is just becoming history now. There is a need to de-risk, yes, indeed, but really we should try to get or to attract investors that are there for the long haul and not just for short-term gain. And it's also very important to understand that there is a need for public-private partnership. The private entities should come to our continent. Yes, indeed, we welcome them, and it's very important that there is flow of direct investment, but we want also our countries to be the drivers of their development. They have to be, the ones that should design their destiny. They are the ones that pave the way to this destination. And, supporters and investors should be behind and not in front, because the interest of Africa is to be served to its people. The second thing I would like to say is really, when we talk about investment, we always, forget, the people. And yet local communities are very critical and very important. And that's where the business is, and that's where you make the difference. And you can only make a difference if you work with them and give them, the space to express their needs and meet their needs. The third thing that I would say is technology. The African continent is filled with young innovators, inventors. They're coming out with innovations as solutions to the development challenges, and we need to support them. We need to support them. You go from one country to the other, there are many MSMEs in sustainable business, and they are making profits.
Absolutely.
And they are run by youngsters. Yeah. So I'll stop here.
No, you don't. Maybe build on that.
I'll just build on what you said about sort of, strengthening local institutions, backing local entrepreneurs, including, like, when you look at sovereign wealth funds and pension funds across Africa, not enough of them actually invest in African businesses, right? Until they start investing in African funds, African businesses, we can't expect Chicago Teachers Pension Fund to invest in Africa. That's one thing. We have also quite a few African institutions that need to be supported and backed. African Finance Corporation, African 50, African Development Bank, they're doing actually quite a lot of projects across the continent, and they're more successful for different reasons. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, we were trying to develop, in fact, Samaila this morning from African Finance Corporation was talking about this Djibouti wind project they just inaugurated about a week ago. And we were trying to develop that project when I was at Black Rhino, which is a portfolio company of Blackstone. And we were actually the first to start negotiating, but in the end, the government of Djibouti gave the project to Africa Finance Corporation. I'm not surprised because they have a much more longer term perspective.
Exactly.
They're in the continent. The government understands they're not there to just build the wind project and leave. They're going to be there to build the port, to build so many other things. But I think we need to really support those kind of organizations. And then another point I'd like to make is the diaspora is such an important investor for the continent. Last year, literally in the middle of the war in Ethiopia, the only investors that are thinking about investing in Ethiopia were Ethiopian Americans, Ethiopians living in Europe, because they have a much more longer term perspective, right? They're not going in and out. They're thinking about their country. And when I was at US, at OPIC, which is now called the US Development Finance Institution, our largest portfolio in Africa was actually backed by the diaspora that are going back. Ghanaian Americans investing in Ghana, Nigerian American investing in Africa. And Africa does pay a premium on risk, to be honest with you. The perception, there is real risk on the continent. We do need to de-risk stuff. But the perception and the reality on the ground is actually not accurate. When I was at OPIC, our NPLs, our non-performing loans, by region, Africa was actually the best performing at the time. True. Even me, as someone who was born in Africa, when I found, like I said, I wanted to see the portfolio by regions, and when I saw that we actually had expropriations in Latin America, outright expropriations in Venezuela and other markets, what we didn't have on the continent. That surprised me too, you know? And I mean, things may have changed, and the macroeconomic conditions obviously have worsened more recently, but I just think the reality and the real risk are very different. And one thing also, on bankability that I would like to speak on, there's always this conversation, there's lack of pipeline, lack of projects, pipeline. On that, yes, we do need some more catalytic, more philanthropic capital perhaps to come in and de-risk, especially on climate, because there's a huge opportunity. I was just in Nairobi for the Africa Climate Summit. You saw President Ruto hosted a bunch of leaders, but also businesses, and real commitments were made at that. And Africa was driving the agenda for a change and not sort of following. And I think you said it, Nardos, we do need to start manufacturing in country, needing to trade with each other. Inter-regional trade is still 18%.
Exactly.
Why should Kenyans in East Africa be exporting their loose leaf tea to Europe and buying back English breakfast when they could sell it to Nigeria, West Africa, where there's a whole population drinking tea? But I think more trade, and hopefully with those kind of things, more money will come in. But you can't expect institutional capital to come in until those things are developed. And we can't, of course, forget human capital as well. Developing human.
So then where does it start? Because that is a lot to cover at this point in time, and institutional investors are looking, and still, I know you're both talking about the long-term view, but they are still, thinking about the short term and what they're going to gain in the short term. So how does it change, and how do we actually see some tangible movement towards some progress here?
Yeah, at least on the climate side, maybe I could talk a little bit about what I'm doing. We're at Three Cairns Group, where I'm at. We've actually started this Project Allied Climate Partners, where we're actually raising philanthropic capital to come in and de-risk projects for climate in Africa. We're going to back a fund in Africa, maybe size of 250, 300 million, where 25% of it will be actually first loss. Because even the development finance institutions, and I've worked at one, don't come in until financial close, when things are de-risked, really, and it's completely bankable. They're not coming early in and taking on the risk. So we're bringing in like-minded philanthropic capital to come in and be junior equity, first loss, but pari passu on the returns. So things like that, hopefully, senior capital, including commercial and DFIs, will come in later. We need a lot more of that. I mean, that's not just one of the solutions, that's just one, but I think we need more of that.
What would you say to that?
Well, I think, when you look at it, the most important thing is the expansion of the economy, but really putting also as many people as stakeholders in the economy. And, like Mimi just said, building that value chain is very critical and very important. We know the pillars of growth in Africa, then we have to support them, building that value chain and building that capacity building along the value chains and making sure that the young ones go into these chains or not go into these things, but at least incentivize them to go there. You know, it's very important and critical because when you see, you know, even in Ethiopia, when we started the strategic management for industrialization in Ethiopia, you know, textile industry was just nowhere. The leather industry was not nowhere until we built a value chain and really supported each value chain. And therefore, you know, investing in this is critical and very important, as well as investing in institutions that support these are very important. When we come and say, okay, we're supporting the small and medium enterprises, what we do is just give them a little token of money, but you know, we forget that it is a judicious mix of support that will make a business to thrive. In Africa, if these MSMEs driven by the young ones have, you know, thrived in sustainable business, I think if we support them, we'll make such a difference. And that's where we are. The AFCFTA, that is one of our really big, a big program, is really now in place. And we are trying to harmonize also the regulatory frameworks, support institutions like the intellectual property institutions, try to see on how money can be transferred, how commodity can go, build the infrastructure, which is very critical and very important. All these things are things that are very important, and they are in our second 10-year implementation plan. And by the way, one of the problems in Africa is lack of coordination. I mean, the whole development space is overcrowded, and you really wonder what is all these, you know, all these people and all these entities doing, what are they doing? And therefore, you know, we need to coordinate. And what we have done is we have brought along all development partners, the private sector, civil society organizations, to be in the design of this 10-year implementation plan, to identify the priority areas, the drivers, the moonshots, and based on that then to be able to monitor progress towards the development towards the realization of this implementation plan. But most importantly, I think the youth need to be supported. And we should not just, you know, we shouldn't just be talking about it, but really acting.
Yeah, right. And I think that's a good point, because we have had a lot of talk this week at the UN. We have a lot of talks in a lot of these forums, a lot of promises, but there needs to be some results, right? And so I want to know from both of you, just before we wrap up, what's your expectation? I mean, are you optimistic? Should we end on a positive note?
I have to be optimistic, right? But when you look at even, you know, the VC funding going into fintech, which is, you know, sort of an exciting sector now, there's lots of innovation going on the continent. That's what really gives me hope, right? The young people give me hope, not the old leaders, unfortunately. I'm sorry if there's any more.
They're still around.
They're still around. But when you look at the money going into VCs and early stage, it's still going, 75% of it is going to 4 countries, right? It's Nigeria, it's Kenya, it's Egypt, and South Africa. The other is going to the rest. So on the enabling environment, we need to do a lot more to have a conducive environment for those entrepreneurs that are creating for the rest of the continent. That's what we need to do.
I think, you know, just to say that, you know, we started, when I just came into Auda NEPAD last year, I started Energize Africa. The African continent can only be energized by youthful energies, by the creative minds, by the innovative minds. And supporting them is very critical and very important in 3 areas. And you know, whether we like it or not, under a tree with their smartphone, you know, they're coming up with apps. Can you imagine what that would mean if they're supported? And I've seen many without even the English language. I saw an Ethiopian who doesn't even speak English, who's come out with a real technological device that helps the security of the country. And this was, you know, a showcase in the Ministry of Defense. You know, these are young, creative minds that we are losing out. And we have them in plenty. So the program addresses 3 things. The first component is that, you know, African, like you said, maybe the whole, our age, we cannot even understand the young ones. So leave alone design solutions for them. We have to integrate them in the public service to be able to modernize the public service to their interests, in their interests. Okay?
Yeah.
And that to do, the wage bill is so high that you cannot do that. So we are coming out with a program that would really map out all these PhDs, masters, okay, that are drowning in the ocean, to be able to be trained and to be helping in the public service to modernize it, to reform it. And hopefully we'll manage in a year or two. We have already started integrating them in the regional economic communities, but we're going now to the various ministries and government offices. The second one is startup, innovation hubs. First of all, there are many innovation hubs. To me, the curse is the fact that, the words, slogans are more important. But when you go and see what they are translated into, there is nothing. It's just a skeleton. So we have got millions of innovation hubs. We want to map them, we want to standardize, we want to set standards for them and see what works, what doesn't work, and how to replicate them everywhere so that the young ones could express their creativity. Then the whole thing around AFCFTA that we are doing, the supply value chain support, the intellectual property, the Bureau of Standards, the export zones, the export promotion zones, and all these things that we're doing, we need to support them. We need to support so that they thrive and create that, a real, complete support to startups and also to MSMEs. So this is what we would like to do. Let's not do it in a fragmented way. Let's all come to support and be real, and do something meaningful to help the young ones.
Have to see in a year where we're at, but hopefully we're already making the building blocks at this point in time. Your Excellency, Mimi, thank you so much for your time. Thanks, everybody.